Namaste and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology debunking mythology. Sat means truth and logos means a study or science. Sattology means a science of truth or study of truth. So today we are talking about a very interesting topic. Mythology, on the other hand, means a science of fake lie imagination or study of fake lie imagination. Most of the academic universities in North America do very good work on the methodology of research. But the content of research is what we question, because the content is what we want to uh, find out. Like, for example, there's a very popular topic. I have my great friend, Rishi Muni, researcher, scholar, Swami, whatever you want to call him. But he's a very good, he goes into details. So without delay, let us welcome Shri Nilesh Oak.
Namaste, Aditya.
Namaste, namaste.
I'm very happy to be here on Sattology.
So, likewise, Nilesh, one question comes in the critical race theory. And if you look at the race history, the entire racial history from Europe and Arabic lands and Africa, I'll touch upon Africa because Africa is the least discussed topics nowadays. And most of the race theory was designed against Africa because in 1841, the Martanda Varma defeated Dutch in India, and people do not know about it. But this is the first time any European major power was defeated in a direct military conflict. So, critical race theory assumes that a lot of natives have been discriminated against, and also, and which is very true, and also the definition of the left. So, I would like you to comment on it, and then we move on to the next question and then the presentation.
Okay, well, my knowledge of whatever this critical race theory is limited. However, what I will say, and this we can say race for as an example, race theory came into being at certain point, I think 19th century, at least the latest incarnation of it. And I don't know, so what exactly that critical race theory is. So I would, after I give my thoughts, I'll like to hear from you. But the race theory was conceived initially, I would say, maybe even innocently, okay, but not a pure innocence, in the sense of there was this dogma of, say, the person who, a German guy, I think, who came up with this race theory was combining his religious dogma, the sort of through the biblical tradition, Christianity, and even Judaism. Then the other dogma assumption that the white race is a superior race, and then the biblical narrative that initially there was a perfect world like the Garden of Eden, and from there, after the curse of the God above, the folks moved in different directions, and as they went away from this ideal place, Garden of Eden, where it was close to perfection, then the things deteriorated. So farther away someone is from the Garden of Eden, and nobody knew where the Garden of Eden is, but that's where I'll come. The things got worse, and from that, the generation of different sons of Abraham and all that came into being. Okay, so initially it may be, there may be an element of innocence. Okay, I mean, I think we need to give that benefit of doubt, but the person who was doing it was in a relatively secluded place. Of course, he has seen the world or aware of the world, but it is perfectly okay. If you don't have a diversity in the thought process or among the thinkers, then there may not be many conflicts because everyone is thinking the same way, like what we think of an academic consensus, right? Or expert consensus. I mean, these are actually fallacies, but that can happen. So that's what I know about the race. Eventually, it just turned it into a nightmare. So I'll give it back to you, but I'll say this happens to other words. For example, take Aryan. I mean, outside India, there is no word Aryan. But when the Europeans came in contact with India, they found the word Aryan in the sense of a noble. And initially, again, they said, well, we are all humanity connected together because of the languages, going back to William Jones. So initially, it was a Aryan romance, you can say, that we are all same. Okay. But very soon that changed, because initially everyone might have thought we are all children of God. That sounds very romantic, but then we have differences, to the extent we can kill each other. Similarly, the Aryan initially was a sort of a romantic notion when the West found it, but then they couldn't bear the thought that the brown guys of India could be the originators of that. And now actually the genetics is proving that that is the case. After the possible initial response from the Africa, rest of the world migration has happened from the India as the mainland. I mean, genetics, anywhere anyone can go and look at the genetics. So I'll talk about more as a how Aryan theory has gone through ups and downs. Okay, but critical race theory, I am not sure. I'm not keeping up with whatever happens in the postmodern or leftist world, of the world. So you have to educate me.
Yeah, critical race theory is just means that the rights of the races were destroyed, like the natives' rights were destroyed, and that is very true. The native population of India, also in Afghanistan, the Hindus were killed for religious superiority purposes. Some people thought that the religious superiority their religion is more superior. So critical race theory, I also say critical religion theory also. So because it has been always be a tyranny of some religions to destroy others.
Yeah.
That happened. Yes.
Okay. Well, a couple of questions. I mean, again, you may not have a ready answers. Like, who came up with this theory? I mean, is it just one person or a group of people? And when did it came into being? The
It
reason
came in.
is, yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
it came
Go
in
ahead.
1970s actually.
1970s. Okay.
70s, and I forgot the name of the author. One is Richard, and another is an African lady,
Okay.
and they came up with this theory.
Okay, because this the surprising part I feel, and again somewhat not surprising, because if anything came up in academia, then this may not have come in academia. They have to always give some complicated names to sound it academic, let's say. But if critical race theory is all about saying that the religious basis or racial basis was used to oppress certain communities, certain other races, I mean, the way the races were defined, then why even call it a theory? Because there is a documented evidence around the world.
That's right.
Okay. Right. So it's not even a theory. I mean, it's like solid empirical data that exists. Okay. It's a fact. I mean, we don't say that, moon goes around the earth is a theory. At some point, it might have been a theory when people were not so sure. Like Greek times, going back, say, 2500 years ago, Greek times meaning only Greeks thought that way. Indians were not thinking that way, and Mayans were not thinking that way. But the Greeks thought that the sun and a moon, for example, and just the planets and even stars are actually like holes in the sky. Okay, so at that time, if somebody proposes, well, actually it's not a hole, but it's some like a sphere that goes around the earth, then it's a theory at that point. So when it comes to the racial, torture, like the torture of Indians around the world, the native Indians or the East Indians, it's a factual data. I mean, we can go and look at the details, and some details may not be available. So I don't know. I'm not sure what it's called theory, but I understand in academia, you have to sometimes call it a theory.
Yeah, and one of the things is the left has always behaved differently as compared to the left, and right is the Western philosophy, French philosophy,
Range, yeah,
and the left has always acted absolutely reverse. Now the left in the US supports the minorities who have been discriminated. Left in India supports the minorities who have been promoted.
yeah,
And the majority in India, in the case of India, the majority have been discriminated.
yes,
It's a different type of left now. So the left
yeah,
and right also changes completely when it moves from west to east.
yeah. Or here, left would claim in America that it's fighting against the fanatic elements or fanatic
Correct.
forces. In India, left is the fanatic element. so, so it's very, very funny. And in close ties with what you can say, very dogmatic, fanatic religions. That's just amazing.
The entire colonization of America, Africa, India, Asia, all parts of Asia, six major countries are involved, which is England, Spain, France, Dutch, and Portuguese. And later on, it was Italians also, and Russia also. Russia was also involved. People do not know that Fort Ross in California was a Russian colony. So, so,
Didn't know that. Yeah.
so it's a everyone. You go to Ross. A lot of businesses by the name of Ross. They are all Russians actually before.
Hmm.
So, and the point is that the colonization was done on three things: gold, glory, and God.
Hmm.
Like the religious institutions like church and mosques were extremely involved in the
Hmm.
entire colonization space. And sometimes some people claim that in Africa the Islam brought peace, but actually the Muslim traders were supplying slaves
Slaves.
to
Yeah.
Europeans to
Yeah.
send them.
They were the intermediate entities
Correct.
working with the Western Europeans,
Yeah.
to do the job for them.
So we'll start the presentation. I think today's
Yeah.
topic is very good from Mahabharata Vritti.
Yeah, and so it's, I mean, not directly related to the critical theory, but how, for example, the something may start innocently, or how the words can acquire a different meaning. Like Aryan is a good word. So Aryan, in Arya, there is no word Aryan at all anywhere in the Sanskrit literature. And since the word that is borrowed by Western Europe is from Sanskrit literature, first thing they have called it wrongly. And I'm not just talking about the pronunciation, right? So first thing, they Arya, it's like it means in noble, like the wife may call her husband Arya, in the sense. So Aryan, I'm not so much concerned, but then they turn it into a theory. Over time, it started as Aryan romantic, like German romance we talk about. Then when they finally search more and realize that the roots are going to be Indian, they didn't, some of them did not like it. So they started going away from it. At some point, Hitler embraced it, so like Aryan race. And so some people liked it who supported Hitler's, other kind of tried to stay away from it. But internally, they always believe they are Aryans. And some sense, I'm going to say now that with the more and more research, actually, they're not quite wrong. I mean, there is no Aryan race, but the point is, because all the migrations after initial African possible migration, because at least we have evidence for that, some evidence, anyways, all the rest of the world migrations, or majority, I should say, not all, are from India. And that's what the genetics is telling us. And it is backed by our ancient Indian narratives. Okay. So the Aryan has gone through its ups and downs, and what the truth of it is. Something similar that something similar that has happened in ancient Indian astronomy. So we are taking a very small point, and how you can find in our contemporary times within India, and within, say, Hinduism or Hindutva, because the Hindutva is also, like, people say Hindutva is different than Hinduism. What what nonsense, they don't understand either. So hey, let them be. But even there can be an element of dogmatism anywhere, because of what we call Sanskruti, Prakruti, and Vikruti. Okay, Prakriti is what is. Sanskriti is like trying to suppress your what you call attitudes, or shadripus, kama, krodha, lobha, moda, moha, and go beyond those. And Vikruti is like embracing them fullest. So Vikruti also happens, and this is one example that I see all the time. Let me start sharing it. So two words here, okay, actually, and very, very uh, interesting, and how the research changes. So Vakri versus retrograde, okay. And so Vakri is Sanskrit word, and I've said that word versus retrograde, and I deliberately chose the title. And then, of course, mysteries of Mahabharata astronomy, and I gave the timing of Mahabharata. Now, why did I call it Vakri versus retrograde? Because in our times, in Indian astronomy, people take the word Vakri to mean retrograde. And that is true. Okay. And that is true, meaning that's fine. That's what they do it. Unfortunately, many of them are so dogmatic that they don't realize that words also take different meanings over a period of time. And how are we going to prove this, that they have truly taken a different meaning? Well, Mahabharata evidence is a fascinating evidence to show this. Okay, very fascinating. So I'm going to start with what that Vakri is meant in the sense of Mahabharata. We will assume that everyone who is listening to it today or will listen to it on YouTube knows what the retrograde motions of planets are. So I'm just going to make a quick summary there. Now, those of you who may not be aware, after this, you can quickly go to Google, just type retrograde motions of planets, and you can, in less than 20-30 minutes, you can read as much as you want or as much as you truly need to. So think of it, of all the visual astronomy, whether ancient visual astronomy or modern visual astronomy, it is always geocentric. Like people just make such a big fuss. It's a half knowledge we say is always dangerous. Like anytime I would say Earth is at the center and something is moving, people say, well, but I was told that it's the sun at the center. That's a half-baked knowledge that is dangerous. For a visual astronomy, who is doing the visual astronomy? No one standing on the sun. We are talking of everyone that is standing on the earth, and we watching the sky from the earth. So visual astronomy, whether of today, whether in the northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere, western hemisphere or eastern hemisphere, whether now or 7,500 years ago at the time of Mahabharata or 14,000 years ago at the time of Ramayana, it's always geocentric. Okay. Now, so therefore, as seen from the Earth, as it relates to retrograde, the planets are seen as going typically, their typical motion, the motion that happens majority of the time, they're going forward in the eastward direction. So at any given night, when you look at it, you're going to find the planet is as if it's a stationary. And as the Earth kind of moves, the planet will rise, go through the entire visible sky, and then set in the west. But if you continue to observe over a long period of time, you're going to see that there is a net motion of a planet, just like sun or moon, in the eastward direction, okay, with respect to the background nakshatra reference system of nakshatra or a zodiac. However, when planets go retrograde, and we are not going to discuss why they go retrograde and so on and so forth today, it's something that the most successful theory of science, namely cosmology and astronomy, the Western science of last 500 years has shown, and someone can easily check it out, in a Wikipedia and Google and whatnot. But during the retrograde, if you see from the Earth, and it's not just seeing one day, you have to see it multiple days. Okay, that's when you start noticing it. The planetary forward motion, it will appear it slows down, and depending on which planet, sometime it will appear, depending on the planet, it may see like as if the planet has become steady. It's not going further in the east direction. It's not going anywhere. So that's one thing you'll notice. Another thing you'll notice is the planet as if it starts going in the backward direction as seen from the Earth with reference to the background zodiac or background nakshatra system. Okay, so that's one thing that you're going to see. When they do that, they're also going to make different shapes. Sometimes it's just they slow down, become steady, and then they go. That will happen for very distant planets like Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, for example. In case of Jupiter and Saturn and Mars and even Venus, but let's just take these three, you will find they slow down, they become steady, they may go backward, they will go backward to some distance, and then they go forward again. And while doing this, these three superior planets, let's talk of visible planets, plus Mercury and Venus, but even drop the Mercury for a minute because it's very rare to actually see the Mercury because it's very close to the sun. We do see it, but so Venus, in this case, what happens? they create some kind of a shape as they slow down and they go backward and then they go forward. They might make a circular shape, they might make some kind of a zigzag path, they might make a shape like a Z in the sky, or a shape like a elliptical or circle in the sky. And that is what is retrograde motion of planets as seen from the Earth. Now, the second biggest characteristic, and this is what we need to know to understand what Mahabharata is saying, and why in Mahabharata Vakra is not retrograde. Okay, so planets in retrograde also appear brighter. Okay, especially let's take the case of a superior planets. And what are superior planets as seen from the Earth? And if you think of only visible planets, visible to the naked eye, then we are talking of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, which are outside the Earth. So Earth is between the sun and these three planets. So when they appear to go retrograde, okay, what is their position? Their position is exactly opposite to the sun from the Earth's perspective. And that's why you will easily understand why they look brighter, because just like a full moon day, it's almost equivalent to a full moon day. That's what these planets are with respect to the Earth and the sun. Okay, Earth is right in between the sun and these planets, so therefore they look brighter. And this is true for Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, but especially dramatic, especially true, and very obvious when it comes to retrograde of Mars. So just keep this in mind, okay, as we jump into the actual evidence from Mahabharata. One more thing we are going to do. Sorry, let me fill this. One more thing we are going to do is this. Understand what is a node of the planet. So I just prepared these slides in a hurry, and so they were not all prepared. So think of it. Let me see if I can go back. Okay, this is good. So there is Earth at the center, because remember, it's a visual astronomy. It is always geocentric. We are observing from the Earth. And you see the circle that is think of as the path of the sun, the ecliptic, the reference point for all astronomy, all visual astronomy. Okay, so that's the sun's path as seen around the Earth. But we also know that there is a path. The moon also goes around the Earth, and as seen from the Earth, the dotted circle is the path of the moon as seen from the Earth. Notice that it is intersecting the moon, sorry, it is intersecting the ecliptic, the sun's path, the red circle, at two places. Okay, they are in the same plane, but they are not exactly overlapping each other. Now, those intersection points, these are mathematical points, they are called the nodes of the moon. In Indian astronomy, they are called, in modern times, again, Adityaji, that's a good one to remember. In modern times, they are called Rahu and Ketu. I'll not go into the details of which one is Rahu, which one is Ketu. But again, lo and behold, if you go back to Mahabharata times 7,500 years ago, or if you go back to Ramayana times 14,000 plus years ago, or if you go back to Rigveda times more than 24,000 years ago, or even the Siddhanta astronomy of Surya Siddhanta going back to 26,000, 40,000, Aryabhatiya 22,000, whatever the long times you go, you do not see. Now Siddhanta astronomy will eventually, the new text will use the Rahu and Ketu, but old text as well as Mahabharata, Ramayana, Rigveda, they do not use the word Ketu. They only use the word Rahu, which is what? A mathematical node point where the two orbits, I mean the orbit of the moon as seen from the Earth, okay, and orbit of the sun intersect. Okay, so that's the node. So what's going to happen? During this portion here, like say outside, we'll just call it outside, the moon is going to be some plus 4-5 degree on the one side of the sun's ecliptic. I mean, only ecliptic, right? Okay. Once it crosses, it's going to be 4-5 degree on the other side. The maximum separation, so like here, what I've shown will be plus minus 4-5 degrees. This is the case of a moon. What is, so that's, people know this, that's how we get the solar and lunar eclipse and so on and so forth. What many people are not aware, that the orbits of the planets, they also intersect with the sun, with the sun's path, which is ecliptic. So what does that mean? In this case, I have shown the orbit of the Mars, for example. It is going, it cuts the ecliptic twice, and those are known as the nodes of the Mars. Now, the position of the node of the moon completes one full circle in 18 years. Number of you, if you are into astronomy, you would know that in the Western world as a Metonic cycle. Originally, it is the Lagada cycle of Vedanga Jyotisha in India. Okay, so it's an 18-year cycle, and that was used to predict eclipses and so on and so forth. So if eclipse happens in some place, okay, a certain eclipse, you can take that time and you know that after 18 years, there will be an eclipse at that place. Okay, that is something you can predict. What kind of eclipse, the type of eclipse might change. Okay, so now what I'm saying is, in Mahabharata text at the time of Mahabharata war, Vyasadeva, the writer of Mahabharata, has noted down these observations. So, for example, take this Mars, and as it goes around, by the way, I said for the node of the moon completes one full circle in 18 years. Now, what about the node of the Mars? You'll be surprised. We are talking of thousands and thousands of years for these nodes of the Mars or Jupiter or Saturn to change. Thousands of years. Okay. Now, that becomes actually useful in dating the ancient events. So now what happens is, suppose the Mars is moving around in its own orbit. At some point, it is going to cross the sun's ecliptic and to go on the one side of the sun. It will continue half the distance in its orbit, and then again it's going to cross the sun's orbit, which is the ecliptic. Okay, and those are the nodes. What I would like to tell you is that there is a sufficient evidence to infer that Mahabharata calls this oblique crossing of a planet across the ecliptic as Vakra. And it does not use this word to refer to retrograde of planets. Okay. So then, of course, naturally, your question in your mind should be, if Mahabharata is calling something else as a Vakra, which is an oblique crossing of a planet across the ecliptic, but retrograde is the most fascinating moment of the planets. That's why they got the name planets, right? Because they're like wanderers. They're not like stars, which are steady. So how does Mahabharata describe the retrograde motion? And I'm going to show you that. But let's look at the Vakra motion, which is an oblique crossing of a planet across the ecliptic. In Mahabharata, we have three references for this so-called Vakra motion, which is an oblique crossing of a planet across the ecliptic. Now, this itself is a giveaway that Vakra cannot be retrograde. And I'm going to explain that with the first one. So let's look at the Mahabharata evidence, just translated from Sanskrit in English. So what Vyasa is saying, around the time of Mahabharata war, now that I have figured out it's 5561 BC, but Vyasa is saying at the time of Mahabharata war, Mars went Vakra near Nakshatra Magha, which is like the area of a zodiac Leo. Okay. Then I'm going to go further and not read what is in the parenthesis here, and says, and it went Vakra again near Jeshta Anuradha, another nakshatra, Jeshta, two nakshatra, Jeshta and Anuradha. And finally, it settled near Shravan and Brahmarashi, which are another two nakshatras. In between, and I'm putting this because that's the sequence, like after Magha, there is a Purva Falguni, Uttara Falguni, Hasta, and now we come to that Chitra Swati. So now I'm going to read what is in the parenthesis. Now here it is described, in Vyasa is describing Mars near Chitra Swati in this fashion. He says, Dhruvam prajwalitam ghoram apasavya pravartate Chitra Swatantare cheva dishtita parushagraha. So between Chitra and Swati, or near Chitra and Swati, Mars became steady, started moving in a apasavya, which means non-normal direction, okay, while shining extremely brightly. Dhruvam, which means steady, prajwalitam ghoram, okay, big shining, ghoram, like in a scary bright, okay, extremely bright. Apasavya pravartate, started moving in a non-normal direction, where Chitra Swatantare chaiva dishtita parushagraha. It's settled between Chitra and Swati, this evil planet. Now, in the Indian astronomy sense or even astrology sense, Mars is considered evil planet, so is Saturn, and so on, or Rahu Ketu. So this is a journey from Magha all the way to Shravana Brahmarashi. Now, in between, so there are like 6 or 7 different observations of Mars from Mahabharata that I read. Now, between, it says it went Vakra near Magha, it meaning Mars, and again Mars went Vakra near Jeshta Anuradha. That itself is a giveaway that this cannot be a retrograde motion. Why? Because Mars will make a one complete circle through all 27 nakshatra, and it will take about 2 years, 1.88 years. And in that 2 years time period, Mars goes retrograde only once. Here we have Nakshatra Magha separated from Jeshta Anuradha, and I'm going to show you the pictures actually, so you will see it better, by only 7 nakshatras. Okay, and within a span of 7 nakshatras, it is not going to go retrograde twice. That is a giveaway. Now, if indeed this is the motion that I'm saying, that is oblique crossing, then do we have additional things to verify? Well, we have 3 opportunities. Mars going Vakra near Magha, Mars going Vakra near Jeshta Anuradha, and Mars going Vakra near Shravana. So let's look at the pictures, okay? And then this one is, I will skip this for now. These are the retrograde descriptions, okay? We will visit that and see how Mahabharata describes retrograde if it's not going to describe them as Vakri. So now let's look at the Vakri, which is an oblique crossing of a planet across the ecliptic. So the first reference for Vakra comes in Mahabharata as this: Magha Swangarako Vakra, that Vakra, Shravanecha Brahaspati. It's simply saying Angarak, which is to say Mars went Vakra near Magha, and Brahaspati, which means Jupiter, went Vakra near Shravan. So we are going to focus only on Mars going Vakra near Magha. So this is a Magha nakshatra here. Okay, this is Earth at the center, moon around the Earth. Then this is the path of the sun. And to show the planets, it's not easy to show in the simulators always the planets crisscrossing unless you use astronomy simulation. This is only a demo simulator, not a true astronomy simulator. So we are not going to show that. So I'm just showing this with the arrow, as if like around the Magha, the planet Mars, which is here, I'm showing, cross the ecliptic. And that's what it is showing. Now, when did it do that? If you go and use the astronomy simulation or mathematical astronomy calculations, you will find that indeed in the year 5562 BCE, about a year before the Mahabharata war, Mars exactly did that. Okay. Now, Mars is doing a lot of things. We are going to look at those. Then again, Mahabharata describes, it says Mars did the same thing again. Krutva, it did. Changarako, Angarako meaning Mars. Vakram, Jeshtaya, Madhusudana, Anuradha, Prarthayate. Again, Mars went Vakri near Jeshta and Anuradha. Okay, so where are these planets? Here. And forget this circle for now. That is the retrograde motion that we will look into the retrograde portion of it. So here, so Mars here has gone on the one side of the ecliptic. Let's call it outside, so to say, just for simplicity. Then it is going here. Now, when it came to Anuradha Jeshta, again, that is the node. And remember, the nodes in this case does not have to be 180-degree opposite, and they are not in case of the planets. Whereas in case of the moon, they are more or less, they are opposite, right? Rahu and Ketu are 180-degree opposite. Not so for the planets, because they don't have to cut it exactly halfway through the ecliptic. So Mars, Magha, it went outside, and near Jeshta Anuradha, again the Mars cut obliquely travel across the ecliptic and came on the inside. Just for simplicity visualization, I'm saying this. That is what Mahabharata is saying, and that is what you can show for 5561 BCE. Okay. Now, these are the 2 Vakra motions for the Mars. Now, what else it is doing? We will look at this circle in the retrograde portion, because remember, when planet goes retrograde, either it makes a shape like a Z, shape like a circle, ellipse, or something like this, or makes some other shapes in the sky. But After doing this, which is to say, after doing Vakra near Maga, after doing another Anuvakra near Jeshta Anuradha, also going retrograde, which we are still going to look at near Chitra and Swati, then Mahabharata says, then finally it came in the area of Nakshatra Shravan and Nakshatra Brahmarashi, and it settled there. Who settled there? Lohitango, which means again Mars. This is a different name of Mars, okay? Like a red colored. So, and we can show that on first day of the Mahabharata war, Mars came near Shravan and Brahmarashi, which is Abhijit or Vega, and settled there. I mean, came there and aligned itself against Brahmarashi on the first day of Mahabharata war. Now we have one more reference. Remember, it also said that Jupiter went Vakra near Nakshatra Shravan. Now, did it do that? Absolutely, it did. Okay, so now remember, Jupiter travels a lot slower than Mars. Mars completes one circle in 2 years. Jupiter is going to take 12 years. Saturn is going to take 30 years. Like, once in 30 years, it will cut once and it will cut in another place. Okay, so does something happen? It's not going to happen every year. It so happens that in that particular time frame, 5561 BC plus minus 1 year, Jupiter also is at near Shravan, and it also obliquely cuts the ecliptic and goes from the outside to inside. Just for simplicity again here, it really means from north to the south, okay? But I'm keeping it outside to inside. And that indeed happens around that time. And it does happen for Jupiter near Nakshatra Shravana. You cannot move this Jupiter suddenly to, say, Purva Falguni. No, that's going to take like 6 years or something like this. Okay, so very, very solid evidence. And now the question should be, so because in our times we consider Vakri to be equal to retrograde in Indian astronomy, many people who refuse to study or who have not studied or have extremely superficial knowledge or struggle to comprehend, they say, well, so okay, so if why somebody will call it retrograde or Vakri? Well, we don't know that. In fact, it may be us making the blunder because Mahabharata was calling, say, Vakri by a certain name, and they called what we call retrograde by something different. It is us who might have confused. So let's not blame them. Okay, but let's understand. So now, why, if Vakri means oblique crossing, then how does Mahabharata describes retrograde motion? Because retrograde motion is the most fascinating aspect of planetary system as seen from the Earth. So does Mahabharata refers to retrograde motion? And if it does, how does it describe it? And if it can be tested, what conclusion it leads us to? Okay, so we have, for example, 3 references, and it covers 4 of the 5 visible planets. And as everyone would know, that sun and moon, they do not go retrograde. Okay, again, why they do not go retrograde? This was well known to the ancient astronomers, Indian astronomers, world astronomers for a long time. Okay, they may not know why, but they knew the observations. Even Western Europe, they knew it, that sun and moon do not go retrograde. Okay, that's why they were separated out from the planets. Now, Indians also consider sun and moon as separate, but they also put it under all the graha, not a planet, graha. Okay, but Indians knew very well that sun and moon did not go retrograde. So we are left with 5 visible planets, and out of that, Mercury is like very what you can say, a too much movable planet. We don't even see it. We hardly even see it. Forget about noting its retrograde motion. There is reference to it in a Mahabharata called Tiryak motion. We will not go there. So we are left with the 4 visible planets: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. Out of that, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter are superior planets, and Venus is inside, which is to say between the sun and the earth. What does Mahabharata's text has to say about their retrograde motions? I'll tell you what words it used when I show the diagram. But what Mahabharata is saying is that at the time of the Mahabharata war, Saturn and Jupiter were in retrograde, or they went retrograde in the vicinity of Nakshatra Vishakha. Now, don't forget that same Mahabharata times, Jupiter also went Vakra near Shravan. Okay, so Jupiter, so Vishakha, Anuradha, Jeshta, Mula, Purvashada, Uttarashada, Shravan. These are 7 nakshatras. Okay, so approximately what, 2 plus zodiac times, and Jupiter is not going to go through 2 rashis, okay, in a 1 year's time. I mean, it needs 1 year plus, approximately 1 year for every zodiac, 12-year orbital period. So there is something going on, right? So the Vishakha needs to be understood in a proper way. Then Mars, it says, went retrograde near Chitra Swati, and Venus went retrograde near Purva Bhadrapada. Let's look at those. Now, the actual Mahabharata reference comes like this. It doesn't use the word retrograde. I mean, retrograde is an English word, right? But what is the word it is using? And I'll read the Sanskrit one when it comes. But essentially translated, it's saying Saturn and Jupiter became steady, okay, in the vicinity of Nakshatra Vishakha for a year while shining brightly. Remember, one of the characteristic of a planet going retrograde is that it becomes a steady. It's not going further, it's not going backward, it becomes steady. That's what it's saying. Then it says Mars became steady near Chitra and Swati. Again, remember, steady, Dhruvam Prajulitam Ghoram, near Nakshatra Chitra and Swati, and started moving in the Apasavya, non-normal direction, which is what happens in retrograde, while shining extremely brightly. Dhruvam Prajulitam Ghoram Apasavya Pravartate Chitra Swatyantare Chaiva Dishtita Parushagraha. Okay. There is another reference from another parva of a Mahabharata which says, Visheshenahi Varshneya Chitra Pediyate Gra. Mars began afflicting Nakshatra Chitra in a very peculiar fashion. Now, we are not going to do the astronomy simulations today, but it is very easy to see what happens in astronomy simulation, and I will just show you that, I mean, describe it. And then finally, Venus, it says, Mahabharata says, Shukram proshtapade purve samaruya vishampate, uttaretu parikramya saita pratyudikshite. Venus came close to Nakshatra Purva Bhadrapada and then turned northward, made a parikrama, like a complete circular path, like we do parikrama in a mandir, in a temple, just making a circle around, right? It did a parikrama near Purva Bhadrapada. Now let's look at those. First, we look at the Jupiter and Saturn. Okay, so what is Jupiter and Saturn telling us? This is the Sanskrit Varnan there, so samvatsaras thainancho, up to a year. Graho prajvalito, again, prajvalito, they were shining, both of them were shining brightly. Where Vishakhayo samipasto Bruhaspati Shaneshcharo, Bruhaspati and Shani, Jupiter and Saturn, they were shining brightly for up to a year in the vicinity of Nakshatra Vishakha. Now, this is this scenario for year 5561, 5562, remember, for a year. So Vishakha Nakshatra is right here. And the Jupiter was not exactly here at Vishakha and Saturn was not at Vishakha. That particular combination will simply not work. Why it will not work? Remember, Mahabharata is a puzzle. Okay, it's like a jigsaw puzzle and a crossword puzzle combined. Actually, it is said in Mahabharata itself. The whole evidence is like that. Grantham Granthi Tada Chakre Munir Gudam Kutualat. This whole text is written in such a fashion. It is full of curiosities. It's full of mysteries. All right. And it is deliberately, it has got many twists so that if it falls in the hands of incompetent people, they will not be able to destroy it. They will not be able to understand. So with respect or something, they will just remember it as it is. Okay. That's what many people did. And only the person who can have an insight in astronomy may be able to decipher it. So that Vishakha is in the middle. And see that Samipasto is in the vicinity. So you can look at the position of Jupiter and position of Saturn. It's like equidistant. And of course, that's even approximate. Okay. So 3 nakshatras on one side, 3 nakshatras on the other side from Vishakha. Remember, in the same year that Jupiter has to come to Shravana, to do this, what? I'm going to show you. Vakranu Vakram Krutvam cha Shravane Pavaka Prabha. Okay. And Jupiter is also doing Shravanacha Brahaspati, Magas Vangarako Vakra Shravanacha Brahaspati. So Jupiter has to come to Shravana and obliquely cross it. So here, this one, if you check for 5561 BC, 5562 BC, what you're going to find in astronomy simulation is in the vicinity of Vishakha, with Vishakha in the center, you're going to find Saturn in the west, Jupiter in the east, separated by some 3+ nakshatras on both sides, that they were going in the retrograde. They go retrograde every year, okay? But that's the area that they were doing. Now, we are not going into other observations of Mahabharata, but there are additional observations for Saturn. There are additional observations for Jupiter than what I already discussed. That that particular year, whichever year anyone claims for Mahabharata, must satisfy those. Okay, let's go quickly, and I'm almost done. Now we are at a Mars. Remember, we talked about Mars going Vakra near Magha, that was here. Then we also discussed Mars going Vakra near Jeshta Anuradha, that was here. Then finally it coming to Shravana Brahmarashi here. And one more reference, which is now we are looking at. We are now looking at retrograde. Dhruvam prajvalitam ghoram apasavya pravartate chitra swatyantare chaiva dishtita parushagraha. By becoming steady and shining extremely fierce bright, whatever you want to call it, while moving in the non-normal direction. That's what it did. Usually all the planets are going in this fashion, from west to east in this circular fashion, okay, in this sequence of nakshatras. But when they go retrograde, so Mars actually, it came here near Hasta, went to Chitra, went as far as Swati, then turned back and came all the way back to Chitra, and then started going in the forward direction finally. Essentially, see, this is the timing. Essentially, Mars was in the area of Chitra and Swati from November to May, which is what? Almost 6 months. It was there essentially between two nakshatras. And do you know something? How long it takes for Mars to move through one nakshatra, which is like, say, 13 degrees? About 20 days. That's all it takes. But because it has gone retrograde in 5561, 5562, 5561, it is between Chitra and Swati for 6 months. And that is what is captured by Vyasa. He's saying, Dhruvam prajvalitam goram apasavya pravartate chitra swatyantare chaiva dishtita. It has literally become fixed. It's not going anywhere for 6 months. Okay, so that's the retrograde motion for the Mars. We already looked at Jupiter and Saturn. Quickly, the last one. Now, Venus, which is Shukra, is an inner planet. Okay, it's not a superior planet, and the dynamics why it goes retrograde is slightly different as seen from the Earth. We are not going to go into that. But what is fascinating is that again, Mars will go retrograde once every 2 years. Venus also goes retrograde every 2 years, and Saturn and Jupiter will go retrograde every year for a few months. Okay, so now looking at the Venus, it's going to go retrograde only once in 2 years, guys. Okay, and when it goes retrograde, it's in the reference to a specific nakshatra area. So you cannot fool around and just play and do manipulation, which unfortunately many Mahabharata researchers do. So what is the Mahabharata reference there? Shukra proshtapade purve samaruya vishampate uttaretu parikramya saita pratyudikshite. Venus came near nakshatra Purva Bhadrapada, Purve proshtapade, that's another name, but Purva Bhadrapada. Then uttaretu parikramya, by turning to the north. Some people translate by going to the Uttara Falguni, Uttara Bhadrapada, that's fine too, it doesn't matter. But actually turning to the north, that is more relevant because that's what exactly it shows. Turning to the north, and it did a parikrama. It made a complete circular loop. Okay, it went from, so far here, if you look at this, it went from Purva Bhadrapada, came towards Uttara Bhadrapada, turned northward, made a circle, went all the way back to that Shatabhishaj. Then it came again towards Purva Bhadrapada, Uttara Bhadrapada, and proceeded in the its regular path in the eastward direction. If you just take these retrograde motions, okay, and try to match all of them, and then just for fun add the Vakri motions of the Mars and Jupiter that we looked at, okay, you bring this together, even let's say just for a minute, just because you want to have exciting time, you chose, now you shouldn't do that by the way, but suppose you chose not to look at Arundhati Vasishta observation, suppose you chose not to look at the Bhishma Nirvana observation and what they are giving you, because they are giving you a very beautiful, nicely defined time interval from 5000 BC to 7000 BC to look for the year of Mahabharata war. But even if you, let's say you don't look at it, you only look at the retrograde motions of these 4 planets and Vakri motions, that is oblique crossing motions of 2 planets 3 times, Mars doing twice and Jupiter doing once. These combinations are also going to take you, just the planetary combinations of retrograde and Vakra will also take you to only 1 year in last 10,000 years, for example. I'm just saying in a crude fashion. Before also that may be true. I have not tested it more than 10,000 years because there is no need to, because we know that we have to only search for Mahabharata war between 5000 and 7000 BC. But it is going to take you to 5561 BC in last 10,000 years. Okay, so that's it. So quick summary then. Again, number of you who have seen me and watched me before, this is not isolated lecture. I have given many others on Indian astronomy, especially astronomy from the epics, from the Itihasa, namely Ramayana and Mahabharata. But again, just taking very two very specific aspects of only planetary world, and there is too much more to discuss in the planets. We are not going to do that. But even that evidence, possibly what, 4 and 7, like a 7 pieces of evidence out of 300 plus. But just the 7 pieces of evidence, and if you understand with the background knowledge of Indian astronomy and modern astronomy, it will also take you to 5561 BCE as the year of Mahabharata war and no other year. Okay. And if you want to know more about it, if you are in India, you can take these 3 books of mine. When did the Mahabharata war happen? Bhishma Nirvan, and then 12,209 BC, which is the timing of Ram Ravan Yuddha. Okay, there is a Ganesha and Deepavali package right now if you want to take advantage of it. And if you are in India, if you are outside India, then Amazon is your choice. And the cover looks slightly different. The same 3 books. When did the Mahabharata war happen? Bhishma Nirvana, the historic Rama, from Amazon. If you have access to Amazon, you can order this. So with that, Aditya ji, I'm going to stop and back to you.
Oh, what a wonderful presentation! Because these stars tell a story, and Indian astronomy was always known for that, well known for that. Now, another important aspect is the Indian astronomy is far more developed than the Western astronomy. What do you have to say on that?
Well, that first thing, that is true. And Western astronomy, to their credit, has indeed caught up with the Indian astronomy. And in some ways, possibly they have gone beyond Indian astronomy, but I will qualify that. For example, Indian astronomy, for most part, close to 100%, was visual astronomy. Well, yes, we have stories of Kukudmi and time travel. These could be thought experiments, or these could have actually been performed. The point is, we don't have empirical evidence left to actually test it. So that's why we are handicapped in that way. There are also stories of Trishanku, Vishwamitra, and Vishwamitra trying to put Trishanku in outer space. So just like we played with the rockets in not that long ago, like less than 100 years, we are playing with it. So what do we know from the modern science is that actually sometime technological improvements can be done in a very short amount of time. So yes, in the antiquities, something might have happened. But as far as at least the empirical evidence, Aditya ji, is concerned, we don't have any. We have a narrative evidence for Kukudmi story or for Vishwamitra and Trishanku and so like that. But to answer your other question, you said Indian astronomy is being very sophisticated. For visual astronomy, it is extremely sophisticated. In fact, the development into navigation in the Western world and the ability for Western European powers to actually colonize the world came from the benefit of Indian astronomy. So that also tells you that astronomy is what it is. It can be used for good things or it can be used for the bad things. And the reason I think, I mean, not even to do the comparison of West versus East, but the reason Indian astronomy as a visual astronomy is a very sophisticated astronomy. It was a sophisticated astronomy. It still is sophisticated astronomy. And now some of its usefulness is gone with the GPS and we're throwing the satellites and whatnot. But before, it was the astronomy, and that is how you could travel, either definitely through the ocean, it was very important, and even on the land. And because it developed from the pragmatic needs of a food, which is agriculture, and a commerce, which is done through navigation, they had to be it is developed empirically, I suppose, but they, and so that's why they were not so much into the theory business as much as making sure that it's accurate and precise. And it's very accurate and very precise because it was a matter of life and death, especially when you are traveling on a boat. And in some sense, that was also true for predicting the agriculture, making sure you sow at the right times and you harvest it at the right times, and so on. And therefore, Indian astronomy is extremely accurate and extremely precise. I mean, anyone can go, and we have given some chats like you and me have discussed this. You can take the ancient values, which are like 10,000 years old, 20,000 years old from Indian astronomy for orbital period, and they match with the modern astronomy orbital periods, right?
No, great information, and I definitely don't want to compare, but because you have more mastery on this topic, and but I take your word for word. I don't want to compare, but one thing it strikes me is visual,
Yeah.
and what about the mathematical side of it?
Mathematical side is also very fascinating in this way. For example, just imagine, yeah, I mean, see, comparison, nothing wrong with comparison. So let's take like Ptolemy, going back to 2000 years. Okay, Ptolemy is the basis for Western astronomy, the known available evidence based for Western astronomy. So that's going back, say, 2000 years. And Ptolemy, to his credit, although the theory is like a patchwork, but to the best of his ability, because there was nothing better in the Western world at that time, he had figured out the geocentric theory and how to predict the positions of the planets and moon and sun and so on. Now, what is interesting is until Western Europe became aware of the Indian astronomy, which is, think of it like with through French, like Bailly and Cassini, and even before that, through French, it came to them through Dutch, French, and of course, then eventually British, through Thailand, to Indonesia, through India. Until then, it's very interesting that both Egypt, Greece, whatever rudimentary astronomy they had access to, until like I'm talking, say, 15th, 16th, 17th century, very interesting. They were, before Newton, simply put, they were using some calculation, but essentially they were depending on the trigonometries, okay, on the geometry side of things to predict things, geometry to predict things. When they came in contact with Indian astronomy, and anyone can read Arya Bhatia or Surya Siddhanta to see that actually there are formulas. Okay, to the first, how the see Surya Siddhanta, I forgot the first chapter, I think it's a Madhyamadikar, but if not the second chapter, it begins with a Madhyamadikar. Do you know what that means? Finding the mean positions of the moving bodies, namely the grahas. I mean, it didn't call planets because it included sun and moon, and even the Rahu, which is the node into that, and also the Chandrocha, like, you know, the apogee and perigee. I mean, very, very fascinating. And how to predict that? By simply formulation. So first you calculate the mean position, just like our vernier caliper. First you take the approximate measurement, and then on a vernier scale, you may take the finer reading and combine the two. Exactly that same method. Now, how old is Surya Siddhanta? Rupa Bhattiji, myself, and the Dr. Anil Narayanan, we have shown that it has got many updates going back to 38,000 BC. Okay. Now, Surya Siddhanta would have gone through its development too. But when Western Europe came in contact with the Indian astronomy, that was the first time they realized, and they were totally fascinated. So if you look, read the words of Cassini, Bailey, John Playfair, and many others, you will see how fascinated they were, because this is the first time. It was a shock to them in some ways, and they grasped it very fast, especially the three names I mentioned. How you can use a mathematical formulation. Now, this is before Newton, by the way. Okay. A mathematical formulation to predict, okay, to calculate the mean positions. And then the next chapter in Surya Siddhanta, for example, is Spashtadikar. So first is a Madhyamadikar, which is a mean position, and Spashtadikar is like a precise position. First is the average position or approximately correct position. Second one is the approximate, I mean, correct, accurate, but also precise. How fascinating. And it was done simply by mathematical formulations. So they may not have a theory, at least we don't have evidence of it. If there was evidence, it's lost. There are some rudimentary ideas in Vaisheshika Sutra related to the gravity, but we don't see the mathematical formulation like F equal to ma, the one Newton did. But my point is, before that, there was a formulation. In fact, it gave a confidence to Western Europeans that it can be taken away from the pure geometry and turn it into a mathematical formulation. Okay, and many times they have done this in a backward fashion. Just try to see how these guys, meaning Surya Siddhanta folks, would have, which is Indian astronomy, the Hindu guys, the Hindutva guys, how they how they would have come up with this mathematical formulation and trying to reverse engineer it. So there may be elements of that too. So long answer, but short answer is yes. Actually, it is a gift of Indian astronomy to the rest of the world astronomy, that the mathematical formulations can be done. Actually, they successfully did it, and they could go beyond geometry. That is not to say they did not use the geometry. Western Europe became better at navigation when they received the sign tables, which are given in both Aryabhatiya and Surya Siddhanta.
Thank you so much, Nilesh ji, and thank you all the viewers who are watching it live, and people who will be watching on YouTube also. Then spread the knowledge, and that's the only thing we ask. Namaste.
Thank you.